The chamber was silent except for the low hum of machinery translating endless streams of combat predictions into cold numerical certainties. The Alien Council, a gathering of species that had long since declared themselves masters of interstellar war, sat in an unbroken circle of confidence. Their faces bore no trace of doubt. To them, humanity was not an opponent but an inevitable casualty, a brief inconvenience on the way to greater conquest. The models were precise. Every algorithm, every historic data point, every lesson from centuries of annihilated civilizations, all fed into their projections. The results were merciless. Earth, in its current state, had no chance. Human fleets were laughably small, their weapons barely capable of scratching the armor of even the weakest alien frigate. Their planetary defenses resembled the outdated forts of ancient empires, impressive to the primitive eye but useless against modern orbital bombardments. The conclusion was inescapable: humanity would fall in hours. One elder, scales glistening in the pale chamber light, raised a claw to speak. Their resistance will not extend beyond a planetary rotation. Our forces will shatter their orbital assets within the first phase. Their governments will fracture. Civilian populations will scatter. In less than half a cycle, they will beg for extinction. A ripple of agreement moved across the circle. Another delegate, representing a species that had crushed 3 civilizations in its own expansionist campaigns, scoffed openly. Their history is filled with petty tribal wars and primitive weapons. Even their so-called nuclear arsenals are toys compared to our antimatter cascades. They cling to their planet like insects, and still rely on combustion as if the stars themselves were not within reach. This war is decided before it begins. The Council's projection spheres shimmered, displaying simulations of the conflict. Alien fleets advancing in perfect symmetry, human defenses crumbling in chaotic bursts of light. Cities burning from orbit. Human ships reduced to debris fields. The calculations were mercilessly consistent. Every path led to the same end, every scenario collapsing into human defeat. A voice from the shadowed end of the chamber added, "Our forces will not require full mobilization. A fraction of the armada will suffice. Let the younger admirals cut their teeth on this campaign. The rest of us need not waste thought on such trivial prey." There was laughter at that. Among them, humanity was already considered a footnote. None of the council members questioned the verdict. They prided themselves on the precision of their foresight, a foresight that had never once been proven wrong. Their empires spanned galaxies not because of chance, but because they had perfected the art of predicting outcomes before the first shot was fired. Numbers were law, and the numbers declared Earth doomed. They discussed how to divide Earth's resources even before the first battle. The oceans would provide fuel and biochemicals. The atmosphere would be harvested for rare isotopes. The planet's crust, rich in metals and radioactive elements, would be stripped bare. Humanity itself, what little remained, might be enslaved for labor in remote colonies, though some argued they were too fragile and inefficient to be of real use. The debate was not over whether humanity would fall, but how quickly its corpse could be exploited. A younger member, curious but cautious, asked if there was any possibility that humans might resist in ways unaccounted for. "They are unpredictable, chaotic by nature," he suggested. "Their record shows survival against odds that would have destroyed others." The response was immediate and scornful. The elder who first spoke dismissed the notion with a wave of his claw. "Unpredictability is the mask of incompetence. Chaos is only the absence of order, and order always prevails. Do not mistake random flailing for strategy." The chamber agreed, and the matter was settled. Final votes were tallied. The campaign would commence within the next cycle. A small fraction of the armada would descend on Earth. Victory would be swift, their supremacy once again proven to the galaxy. The humans, they believed, would be remembered only as another forgotten species that dared to stand against inevitability. As the council adjourned, the elder summarized the consensus in a single, cutting declaration. "By the time their sun rises again, their world will be broken. Their species will be erased from history. Humanity's war will not last longer than the turning of a clock." The council departed in perfect confidence. No one argued, no one hesitated. The decision was written in their numbers, engraved in their arrogance. To them, the future was certain, and humanity's defeat was not merely likely, it was absolute. The world's leaders met under the shadow of certainty. They knew the aliens had dismissed humanity, judged them as already defeated, but surrender was never placed on the table. For the first time in living memory, rival nations set aside their disputes, old grudges collapsing under the weight of survival. The urgency stripped away ego. Generals, scientists, engineers, and politicians gathered as equals. No longer Americans, Chinese, Russians, or Europeans, only humans, facing extinction together. Reports painted a brutal picture. The alien fleet numbered in the tens of thousands, each vessel beyond human comprehension in speed, size, and armament. Earth's combined military presence amounted to a few hundred ships, many not designed for war at all. Orbital defenses were limited, missile silos outdated, and early detection systems already strained. The odds were worse than impossible. Yet the collective decision was unanimous: humanity would resist. Preparation became an act of desperation and defiance. Laboratories were emptied of every last classified project, from experimental energy weapons to artificial intelligence platforms long shelved for ethical reasons. What once was hidden behind bureaucracy now became humanity's only chance. Research teams worked without pause, splicing theories with improvisation, discarding the safe and embracing the dangerous. Ideas that had been rejected as too unstable, too untested, suddenly became viable weapons of survival. On the military front, plans shifted away from conventional engagements. Human commanders knew they could not win in a battle of attrition. Alien weapons outmatched theirs 1,000-fold. Instead, strategy leaned into deception, unpredictability, and sheer audacity. Fleets would operate in scattered cells rather than tight formations. Civilian hackers were enlisted, their knowledge of chaotic system breaches turned into weapons capable of slipping past alien cyber defenses. The lines between soldier, scientist, and civilian blurred until all of humanity was enlisted in the same fight. Ordinary people prepared in their own ways. Families dug deeper shelters, stockpiled food, and said their goodbyes in whispers no one wanted to admit might be final. Children were taught evacuation drills as casually as morning prayers. Streets grew quieter, not with surrender, but with grim determination. Every household understood that survival was no longer guaranteed, but every person resolved that if the end came, it would not come without resistance. The unity was unlike anything Earth had ever known. Nations that had once warred over territory now pooled resources without hesitation. Energy grids were linked, orbital satellites realigned, manufacturing plants repurposed overnight to produce ammunition and drones. Soldiers who had trained to fight each other now stood shoulder to shoulder, wearing no flag but humanity's. Even in the face of annihilation, pride remained. One proposal, once dismissed as too reckless, rose above the rest, not to wait for the aliens to dictate the battlefield, but to confront them with something so unexpected it could fracture their certainty. Humans could not outgun their enemy, but perhaps they could outthink them. What the Council called chaos, humanity redefined as creativity. Plans began to form that exploited every blind spot the aliens had overlooked, every weakness born of their arrogance. Weapons were built not for power but for disruption, systems that could blind sensors, scramble communications, twist gravitational fields into anomalies, and sow confusion where the aliens relied on precision. Earth's small fleet was retrofitted with unpredictable armaments, some cobbled together in weeks, others drawn from classified programs no alien intelligence had ever anticipated. It was a gamble with no safety net, a strategy that would either cripple the invaders or doom humanity faster. As deployment neared, the atmosphere hardened. Soldiers boarded ships with eyes set like iron, knowing they were flying into certain death. Pilots recited brief words over comms, promising their families they would make every second count. Engineers remained in orbit until the last possible moment, rushing modifications even as countdowns began. There was no illusion of victory, only the stubborn resolve to deny the aliens an easy conquest. The Council's projections had measured ships, weapons, and numbers, but they had not measured this. They had not accounted for a species willing to throw every last invention, every shred of ingenuity, into a single desperate stand. Where the aliens saw weakness, humanity saw only reason to innovate. Where the aliens calculated defeat in hours, humanity prepared to turn minutes into legends. The fleets launched, smaller than their enemy, fragile compared to the armada awaiting them. Yet in every human heart burned the same refusal: to be forgotten, to be erased, to vanish quietly into the silence of conquered worlds. Humanity would not simply fight for survival. They would fight to prove that being underestimated was the deadliest mistake the aliens had ever made. The alien armada arrived as a wall of light stretching across the void, its scale dwarfing every human defense. Thousands of ships advanced in flawless formations, their movements synchronized by predictive algorithms that had guided countless victorious campaigns. Against them moved Earth's fleet, scattered and irregular, a few hundred vessels at most. Some were military craft, many were retrofitted civilian haulers, all standing together as the first and last shield for humanity. The opening exchanges confirmed the disparity. Alien weapons struck with mechanical precision, tearing through the outer line of human frigates as though swatting insects. Dozens of ships vanished in minutes, consumed by plasma bursts or reduced to drifting wreckage. Alien commanders transmitted reports of expected progress, their voices filled with confidence. Everything followed the predictions. Humans were collapsing on schedule. Yet beneath the slaughter, something subtle began to unfold. Human formations did not behave as the algorithms anticipated. Instead of breaking into chaos or retreat, they split into unpredictable vectors, small groups maneuvering erratically. Alien targeting systems struggled to model their movements, requiring constant recalibration. What should have been simple extermination began to slow, as precision turned into hesitation. On Earth, the command networks lit with frantic coordination. Human fleets were not acting as units of war but as elements of disruption. Ships drew alien fire into asteroid fields, sacrificing themselves to trigger collisions that fractured alien lines. Others launched waves of decoys and electronic noise, overloading sensor arrays with false targets. Hackers, hidden deep in bunkers, exploited weaknesses the aliens never considered vulnerable, systems not meant to withstand crude but relentless intrusion. Messages flickered across alien screens, fragments of human code worming their way into navigation programs. Confusion rippled through the invaders. Reports contradicted one another. Targets identified as destroyed suddenly reappeared. Human ships emerged from blind spots where none should exist. Ammunition detonated in alien holds, triggered by infiltrated subroutines. Though the losses on the human side remained staggering, each death carved a deeper crack in the assumption of inevitability. Alien Council members, observing from afar, began to notice anomalies in the combat feeds. "Their patterning is illogical," one remarked, irritation creeping into their tone. "Their losses should have broken them," another corrected. "There is no pattern. They do not follow order at all." That was precisely the truth. Human unpredictability, dismissed as weakness, now rendered alien models obsolete. The battle intensified. Where alien squadrons expected resistance to fold, they instead encountered tactics designed to bleed time. Small ships carried out suicide runs directly into supply carriers. Mines disguised as debris detonated in the heart of formations. Civilian freighters, armed with improvised electromagnetic cannons, discharged bursts that scrambled targeting grids. Every act cost lives, but every act bought moments. Minutes stretched, and the certainty of immediate victory began to dissolve. Alien commanders adjusted, shifting strategies to compensate, but the more they adapted, the less effective their algorithms became. Human movements contain no central logic to anticipate. Each group fought according to circumstances, improvising on instinct and desperation. Alien firepower remained overwhelming, yet the efficiency of destruction diminished. For the first time in generations, the Armada faced resistance that could not be reduced to numbers. Reports of malfunctions increased. Navigation systems faltered mid-maneuver, causing collisions among alien ships. Communication networks suffered unexpected overloads. Virus-like intrusions disrupted command relays, forcing admirals to rely on slower, manual coordination. A fleet designed for perfection began to stumble under the weight of disarray. Within human command, the cost was clear. Entire divisions were erased. Names scrolled endlessly across casualty lists. But alongside despair grew a realization: the plan was working. Humanity had not won, not yet, but they had survived longer than the Council had declared possible. Hours had not passed, but minutes had been stretched beyond prediction, and in that stretching lay the seed of victory. Alien broadcasts carried the first hints of unease. Confidence gave way to clipped demands for status updates. Admirals who had once spoken with calm certainty now questioned why human losses had not translated into collapse. The algorithms demanded coherence, yet coherence was nowhere to be found. The Council, watching from their chamber, began to exchange uneasy glances. The simulations they trusted so completely had not accounted for this kind of resistance. Their models, so reliable against every other civilization, faltered when confronted with human defiance. What they once dismissed as chaos revealed itself as adaptability, and adaptability eroded the inevitability they believed unshakable. The fleets still clashed, the destruction still immense, but a new truth had emerged in the void. Humanity had not been broken in minutes, as predicted. They had bent, twisted, and clawed, reshaping the battle into something no algorithm had foreseen. What had begun as extermination was becoming a struggle, and for the first time, the aliens realized the war would not follow the script they had written. The turning point arrived without announcement. Among the chaos of ships colliding, systems failing, and formations scattering, a concealed contingency was triggered. Humanity's gamble, guarded in secrecy even from most of their own fleet, was unleashed. For all the projections the Alien Council had relied on, not one accounted for the weapon Earth had kept hidden behind layers of deception. At first, the effect appeared subtle. Alien drives flickered, lights dimmed, and command relays stuttered. Admirals assumed these were further symptoms of the harassment already endured. But the disturbance spread with unnatural speed. One by one, engines cut out mid-maneuver. Ships rotated uncontrolled, crashing into one another as entire wings lost coordination. FTL cores that had run flawlessly for centuries shuddered and failed in unison. What began as isolated disruption escalated into systemic paralysis across the fleet. The cause was not brute strength. No barrage of missiles or storm of plasma could have produced such collapse. The strike came from a cascade seeded into alien networks by human cyberwarfare teams, a chain reaction that exploited weaknesses buried deep in their technology. The aliens had built their empire on order, on predictability, on flawless synchronization of fleets. Humanity had weaponized that very strength, turning it into a vulnerability. One corrupted command in a drive core infected the next, then another, until the entire formation convulsed in disorder. Within minutes, the invincible armada was no longer a wall of light but a scattered graveyard of failing systems. Warships collided, others spun powerless, and some vanished in catastrophic detonations as reactors overloaded. Alien admirals shouted orders, but half their networks were silent, strangled by the spreading cascade. The perfect precision that had once defined them was shattered, leaving them blind and divided. Human fleets, battered and diminished, seized the opening. Squadrons that should have been crushed surged forward, striking at command vessels now stripped of shields. Missiles found targets with devastating accuracy. Railgun slugs tore through the armor of ships once thought untouchable. Every human pilot understood the stakes and pressed with ruthless efficiency, knowing hesitation would waste the gift their gamble had delivered. For the aliens, disbelief replaced certainty. Council observers demanded explanations. Their predictive models had not only failed but inverted. What they calculated as a short victory had become catastrophic defeat within minutes. They had accounted for superior firepower, overwhelming numbers, and flawless formations, but they had not accounted for humanity's willingness to design a weapon that was as reckless as it was ingenious. The very notion of deliberately destabilizing systems at the foundation of spacefaring technology had never crossed their imagination. To them, such tactics were unthinkable. To humanity, they were survival. The battlefield shifted from annihilation to collapse. Alien vessels attempted retreat, only to find their drives corrupted. Others turned their guns on themselves, purging infected systems in desperate bids to isolate the spread. None of it mattered. The cascade advanced too quickly, embedding itself into the fabric of their fleets like a contagion. In less than 20 minutes, an invasion force that should have obliterated Earth was reduced to fragments of disabled wreckage and pockets of isolated survivors. Human losses remained vast, but now they carried meaning. Sacrifices that had seemed futile hours earlier had bought the time needed for the strike to unravel the armada. Humanity had not just resisted, they had dismantled the image of alien supremacy. What the Council declared as certain was exposed as fragile, brittle under pressure from minds willing to ignore convention and embrace risk. In the command chambers far from the battle, the alien leaders faced a silence heavier than any explosion. Their calculations, flawless across centuries, had collapsed in the span of minutes. Their fleets, symbols of inevitability, lay crippled by those they had dismissed as primitives. Each member of the Council understood the enormity of the failure. They had not simply underestimated humanity. They had misunderstood them entirely. Humanity had proven that weakness could be turned into strength, that desperation could forge innovation no predictive algorithm could anticipate. The war, declared settled before it began, ended not in hours but in minutes, and the victors were not the empire that spanned the stars but the species that refused to accept inevitability. The aftermath settled like a shockwave across the galaxy. The invincible fleet was gone, not in glorious combat but in the quiet ruin of ships adrift and systems failing. Entire squadrons lay powerless, their remains scattered among the stars as grim monuments to arrogance. What had begun with laughter in the council chamber ended with silence heavy enough to crush pride. For the first time in generations, the empire that had claimed inevitability faced undeniable defeat. On Earth, the news carried in bursts of broken signals, but even fragmented reports revealed the truth. Humanity had endured. Families that had braced for extermination wept in disbelief, their tears carrying both grief and triumph. Cities emerged from bunkers, not to ruins delivered from orbit, but to skies still their own. Losses were vast, but survival had been won, and with it a future that had seemed already buried. The memory of sacrifice became inseparable from the victory. Every destroyed vessel, every fallen pilot, every nameless crew member had bought the moments needed for the cascade to spread. Their names filled endless walls of remembrance, yet the weight of grief was borne alongside an unshakable pride. Humanity had not simply avoided annihilation. They had defied the very laws of certainty imposed upon them. The alien council struggled to grasp the magnitude of what had occurred. Their fleets, designed as instruments of inevitability, were revealed as fragile once their assumptions were exploited. Their predictive algorithms, long considered flawless, had been unraveled by a species they believed beneath consideration. Each leader understood that this defeat was not just military. It was philosophical. The foundation of their power rested on the idea that outcomes could be predetermined. Humanity had shattered that belief in less than half an hour. In the following cycles, debates raged among the alien factions. Some demanded vengeance, insisting humanity be erased to restore order. Others warned that another attempt could only deepen the humiliation, for now humanity's unpredictability was a known force. Even among the most stubborn, whispers spread that the galaxy's balance had shifted. If a species so underestimated could break the Empire's certainty, then no civilization could be dismissed outright. For humanity, the victory marked a rebirth. No longer confined to their planet, they now held a reputation that reached beyond the stars. Diplomats who once begged for recognition now negotiated as equals. Scientists who had once been ignored now commanded respect. Humanity carried scars, but scars spoke louder than strength untested. They had earned a place in galactic history not as victims, but as proof that ingenuity, unity, and sheer refusal could topple empires. The victory also changed humanity's perception of itself. For centuries, divisions had defined their story, nations, ideologies, conflicts that seemed unending. Yet when faced with extinction, those divisions had collapsed into irrelevance. The lesson was written in the stars: survival was possible only when united, and strength came not from weapons alone but from imagination that refused to obey limits. Humanity's future, once threatened with erasure, now expanded toward possibility unbound. Among the alien survivors drifting in the wreckage, one thought repeated in hushed tones: the humans were not supposed to endure. They were not supposed to fight as if inevitability could be denied. They were not supposed to create weapons that defied logic or strategies that abandoned order. Yet they had. That realization spread faster than news of the battle itself, seeding doubt in every empire that once rested easy behind statistics. Human voices carried the final truth best. They remembered the Council's prediction of hours, and they carried it as a badge of defiance. The war had not lasted hours. It had ended in minutes, and in those minutes humanity had transformed from prey to legend. The galaxy would not forget. Not because of the scale of the fleets destroyed or the brilliance of the weapon unleashed, but because a single species, faced with certainty of defeat, refused to accept it. Humanity had proven that inevitability was an illusion, that the underestimated could overturn the impossible, and that survival was not a matter of power but of will. The Council had promised Earth would burn before its sun rose again. Instead, the sun rose over a planet unbroken, a people still standing, and a victory that would echo through eternity.